Welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive in again. Today we're looking at something I think a lot of us have probably wondered about at some point. What happens when a contract isn't just about what's written on the paper, the fine print, but it butts up against, bigger principles, the law, or even just what we think of as basic fairness?
Right, right. Like where you might think, wait, can they actually put that in a contract? We're digging into illegality and public policy in contracts, those fascinating situations where a contract could be totally valid, technically, but still get tossed out of court.
Exactly. So to kick things off, can you break down this whole public policy thing? It sounds kind of broad and abstract.
Yeah, it definitely has that it depends kind of vibe, but at its core, public policy basically means that courts recognize sometimes a contract can't just be about what the two parties agreed to. Like there's this broader context of what's good for society, what's fair, and sometimes those things outweigh whatever deal two people made.
So it's like a reality check on what you can and can't put in a legally binding document.
Exactly. Courts are always trying to balance things out, freedom of contract, the idea that anyone should be able to agree to anything.
Within reason, right?
Well, that's the debate, isn't it? That's where the law comes in. But yeah, they weigh that freedom against potential harm to the public, to society as a whole. It gets really interesting.
I imagine things like preventing someone from being taken advantage of,
Mhm.
especially if one party has way more power than the other, factor into these public policy arguments.
Totally. Courts look at all sorts of angles. Were the terms understandable? Did both sides have a fair shot at negotiating? Were there any shady tactics involved? They want to make sure a contract isn't some kind of sneaky power grab.
Makes sense. What about situations where a contract tries to limit someone's future options way too much? Like that example we talked about before, with the contract saying someone could never work in a restaurant again for, ever.
Ah, yes, that's a perfect illustration of where courts might step in and say, hold on, this just isn't right. They look at the impact on that person's ability to earn a living.
Right, imagine if they were a chef or something. That's their whole career.
Exactly. Or if it's stifled competition in the industry, courts consider all those angles.
So they're like the referees of the contract world, making sure no one's pulling any fast ones and that the game is played fairly.
Love that analogy. It's a bit like that for sure. And speaking of fairness, these public policy considerations pop up a lot with exculpatory clauses.
Hmm.
You know, those waivers you sign where a business tries to dodge responsibility for negligence.
Oh, yeah, like those things you sign at a gym or a ski resort.
Yeah.
We're not responsible if you get hurt.
You got it. Now, for everyday slip-ups, those are usually okay. But when it comes to gross negligence, recklessness, forget about it.
So, if a gym owner knows a treadmill's busted and someone gets hurt.
Exactly. They can't just waver their way out of that. Courts are going to step in and say, nope, you can't sign away accountability that easily.
It's good to know there's a line somewhere. It's amazing how often we see these kinds of things, those gray areas, playing out in real life.
Oh, absolutely. And you know where it gets especially interesting? Family law. When you start talking about unmarried couples, IVF, surrogacy man, that's where you really see those public policy questions take center stage.
You've definitely piqued my interest. Those situations are always so complex, so many layers. Let's unpack some of those cases.
Let's do it. Let's go back a bit. In 1987, Wisconsin, Watts v. Watts, a case about an unmarried couple who split after a long time together. And the big question was, how do you divide up their stuff?
Right, because if they're not married, there's no automatic playbook, right?
Sure.
But they've been building a life together maybe for years.
12 years in this case. They acted like a married couple, even filed joint taxes. So does that mean they should be treated like one when it comes to property, even without that piece of paper? The court had to grapple with that.
So what happened? Did they just split everything down the middle?
Not quite that simple. The court ended up saying, you know what, we have this thing called unjust enrichment for a reason. Basically, one party shouldn't get to walk away with the windfall just because they weren't officially married.
So even without a marriage contract, the law recognizes
Mm-hmm.
that years of living together, sharing a life, that creates certain expectations.
You got it. It's like the court saying, hey, we're not going to ignore reality here. They looked at the bigger picture, the fairness of it all.
Fascinating. Okay, shifting gears a bit, you mentioned IVF. Those agreements can get really thorny, right? When you're talking about potential children, that's a whole other level.
Absolutely. And there's this case, Cass v. Cass, New York, 1998, really highlights the complexities. Divorcing couple had embryos created through IVF, and their agreement said if they split, the embryos would be donated to research. Makes sense on paper, right?
Seems straightforward enough, but I'm guessing it wasn't that simple.
You know it. During the divorce, the wife has a change of heart. Now she wants custody of the embryos.
Wow. Talk about a tough situation. So you've got this agreement, but then you've got one person wanting to back out of a decision with huge consequences. What did the court do?
This one went all the way up to New York's highest court, and they ended up upholding the original agreement. They said, look, agreements matter, especially when it comes to such a sensitive, life-altering issue like this.
So it's about upholding contracts, but also recognizing the gravity of the decision being made, right? Like
Yeah.
someone can't be forced into parenthood if they don't want to be.
Exactly. And that actually brings us to another case, AZ v. BZ in Massachusetts in 2000. In this one, a couple had a contract saying any leftover embryos would go to the wife if they split. But the husband was like, hold on, I didn't actually agree to that.
So maybe a situation where one person felt pressured into something they didn't fully understand.
That was the argument. And the court actually sided with the husband. They emphasized that no one can be forced into having kids just because of a contract. That right to choose, to be a parent or not, is paramount.
Wow, that's huge. Makes you realize how much weight the court gives to those fundamental life choices. Okay, speaking of weighty choices, we can't forget about surrogacy. Those cases are like a perfect storm of legal, ethical, and emotional complexity.
You're telling me. And there's no case more iconic, more paradigm shifting than the Baby M case. 1987, this one captivated the entire country.
I actually remember hearing about that one growing up. If I'm remembering right, a couple had a surrogacy agreement. The woman used her own egg, but when the baby was born, she wanted to keep her.
That's the one. This case threw the whole idea of surrogacy into question. The surrogate mom, she took it to court, said the contract shouldn't be valid and she should be the legal mother.
Oh man, what a heartbreaking situation for everyone involved. How on earth do you even begin to decide something like that? Where did the court even land?
It was a tough one, no doubt. The New Jersey Supreme Court ultimately ruled against the contract. They said treating a child like property, like something you can buy and sell, that's not right. It's against public policy.
Wow. So they basically said the whole idea of a surrogacy contract, at least in that form, was unacceptable.
That was a turning point, for sure. Made everyone take a hard look at the ethics of surrogacy, and it led to a lot of changes in the laws around it.
Such a powerful example of how public opinion, the courts, the whole legal landscape, it's not static, right? It changes as society changes.
100%. What might have been unthinkable a few decades ago, now it's becoming more accepted, more common.
It's a great reminder that the law has to adapt to the times we're living in. Okay, so we've talked about those contracts that kind of skirt the line, right? Pushing the boundaries of what's okay. But what about when a contract just goes completely rogue, crosses right over into illegal territory?
Yeah, no more gray areas, right? We're talking black and white against the law.
Right.
And there, the courts are pretty clear we don't enforce illegal contracts. End of story.
So if you have a contract to, like, rob a bank, and one person doesn't hold up their end of the bargain.
Yeah, too bad. Pretty much. The law isn't going to help you out if you're trying to do something shady. It's like they say, don't do the crime if you can't do, well, you know the rest.
Right. So that's pretty straightforward.
Hmm.
But are there times when a contract might seem legit at first glance, but actually involve illegal stuff under the surface?
Oh, for sure. Sometimes it's the whole point of the contract, like if you agree to sell something you know is stolen. But sometimes it's more about how someone plans to use what they're getting through the contract.
Okay, so like the contract itself isn't for something illegal directly, but it ends up being part of something shady. Got any examples of that?
Think of it like this. You have a contract for construction work, perfectly legal, right? But what if one party knows the other one is going to use that construction to, say, build a secret room for some illegal activity?
Ooh, getting a little cloak and dagger there.
Yeah.
So even if it doesn't say anything illegal in the contract, if it's connected to something shady, that's a problem.
Exactly. Courts are getting smarter about looking beyond the literal words and seeing what's really going on. Like, what did each party intend? Was there deception involved?
That makes me wonder about those situations where someone might sign a contract without realizing they're getting mixed up in something illegal. Any way out for them?
Potentially. If they can prove they were tricked or pressured into it, like through fraud or misrepresentation, the court might let them out of the deal.
So it's not just about what's written down. It's about making sure everyone knew what they were getting into in the first place.
Right. True consent, that's key. And that leads to another question of what if a contract has both good and bad parts, legal and illegal stuff mixed together?
Can you just, like, cut out the bad parts and keep the rest? Asking for a friend?
Haha, right. Well, sometimes you can. It's called severability. If the court can just remove the illegal bits without changing the whole point of the contract, they might do that.
Like a legal surgery. Just take out the infected part.
Exactly. But sometimes it's too messy, too intertwined. In those cases, they might have to throw the whole thing out.
So it really is a case-by-case thing, huh?
Mm,
Which is why it's always better to get things right from the beginning, I guess.
100%. Drafting a good, clear, legal contract that's worth its weight in gold, trust me, trying to fix a mess in court is not fun for anyone.
Lesson learned. Well, folks, there you have it. A whirlwind tour of what happens when contracts go rogue. We've covered a lot of ground today, from those blurry lines of public policy to the hard stop of illegality, and through it all, one thing's for sure. Contracts are powerful, complex, and a little bit wild sometimes.
Should have said better myself.
So next time you're signing on the dotted line, think twice, read carefully, and maybe, just maybe, give a lawyer a call. It's better to be safe than sorry, especially when it comes to the wild world of contracts. Until next time.